The $40 million weapon that can't stop a $600 drone. The moment the drone wins. It started with a flicker, just a blip on radar almost too small to notice. Not a fighter jet, not a missile, just noise the kind analysts filter out 100 times a day. But this one stayed. 40 miles from the city, an operator leaned closer to the screen, watching as the 40 million air defense turret rotated toward a target barely the size of a dinner plate. Software confirmed contact. Commands flowed down the line. The order came through, engage. A glare cut the horizon as the missile launched, then disappeared into cloud. Silence followed, too long, too heavy. When the feed cleared, the dot was still there, dipping lower, changing course, indifferent. The shot had failed. The most expensive shield of the modern battlefield had just been outsmarted by something built in a garage for the price of a phone. On the ground, a detonation the size of a trash can tore through a supply truck on the perimeter. A single FPV drone, built from commercial parts, held together with tape, had slipped through what should have been one of the most secure air defense grids in existence. A one-time use flying camera had just outsmarted a machine that cost more than most jet fighters. That explosion was small, but everyone who saw it felt the bigger impact. The realization that absolute technological dominance was an illusion. The frontline crew knew it instantly, years of training and billions in procurement gone in a single burst of flame. Engineers designing countersystems around the world would spend months dissecting those few seconds, trying to understand how a toy beat a fortress. The drone itself wasn't special. A homemade build GoPro camera, lithium battery, a 3D printed casing, and a small explosive payload. But what it represented was massive. For centuries, armies have trusted the idea that spending more produces safety, that complexity equals superiority. Yet time after time, history proves otherwise. On that day, the message was as clear as the smoke rising from the wreckage: price doesn't measure power. To see why, you have to rewind. Because every era of warfare has watched this same movie play out with different actors, where the expensive, the advanced, and the seemingly invincible meet something smaller, smarter, and far cheaper. Think about it: tanks that fell to hand-launched rockets, fortified castles broken by homemade cannons, billion-dollar ships scared of swarming speedboats. War keeps revealing the same flaw: too much faith in hardware, not enough in imagination. That anti-drone battery on the hill with its sleek targeting optics and AI-assisted radar is only the latest chapter in a very old story. The pattern always begins the same way. One side invests everything in control, better armor, longer range, greater firepower. The other side, unable to match resources, turns to invention. They look for simplicity that breaks the system. Sometimes it's desperation. Usually it's necessity. And necessity, more than funding, rewrites battlefields. So here's the question that drives this story. Why do expensive weapons keep losing to cheap ones? It isn't luck and it isn't incompetence, it's the structure of war itself. Technology reaches for perfection, reality punishes predictability. The moment a weapon becomes dominant, the clock starts ticking. Somewhere, someone is already working on the cheaper answer. That night, the drone operator launched from a garage miles away. A teenager only a few years out of high school, following video tutorials that once taught racing tricks on YouTube. He didn't need an airbase or satellite link. He needed only line of sight, a headset, and steady thumbs. His adversary was a multinational defense network worth tens of billions. Both existed in the same airspace for 40 seconds. That's all it took to expose how outdated our confidence really is. For everyone watching that feed, the shock wasn't technological, it was psychological. The drone's hit proved that modern warfare had entered a state of asymmetry so extreme that cost itself had become irrelevant. Power wasn't about who could build the biggest weapon, it was about who could adapt faster. In the weeks after, videos of similar strikes circulated online, grainy clips of cheap drones diving toward armored vehicles, bunkers, and missile batteries. Each one less surprising than the last. Because once you see it happen, you start recognizing the pattern everywhere. History doesn't move in straight lines, it loops. So tonight, we trace that loop. From medieval rebels turning wagons into moving fortresses, to resistance fighters weaponizing bottles of fuel, to guerrillas outrunning tanks with shoulder-fired rockets. Every age has its underdog invention that rewired the rules of dominance. The $600 drone is simply the newest reminder. War has never been fair, but it's always been creative. And that creativity born in corners, basements, and battlefields is what keeps dismantling the myth that money can buy invincibility. The moment the drone won wasn't about a single explosion. It was about every army in every era realizing that innovation never obeys a budget. Section 1: The Timeless Pattern. War has always been a competition between invention and inertia. Every generation steps onto the battlefield believing its weapons edge closer to perfection. But the truth is simpler: perfection never lasts long because someone always finds a way to break it for less. If you map history through its armies, you'll see the same rhythm. One side pours fortune and faith into a tool meant to end all wars. The other side studies it, learns its weaknesses, and invents something crude but clever. Often, the tool of triumph isn't forged in a government laboratory. It's built in a village forge or improvised on the spot when the official equipment fails to deliver. You could call it asymmetry, but it's really physics in human form. When one side grows heavy with armor, the other side learns to move light and fast. When the strong build walls, the weak invent ladders. The titans of each era make the same mistake. They assume their advantage is permanent. The ancient world offered the first reminders. Bronze shields met sling stones, projectiles that cost nothing and yet could shatter a soldier's skull through sheer velocity. David and Goliath wasn't just a story, it was strategy condensed into myth. The wealthy armies of antiquity built chariots, then elephants, then siege towers. Each time, somebody with fewer resources found a simpler countermeasure. Fire, terrain, a shift in formation, or just the courage to run straight at the gap nobody defended. Fast forward to the Middle Ages. Knights in plate armor dominated the battlefield for centuries, an entire economy built around maintaining their superiority. But the first appearance of gunpowder, crude, unreliable, even dangerous to fire, undid all of it. A peasant with a hand cannon could now wound a noble who had spent his life training for combat. The math was humiliating. One weapon worth a few days of wages neutralized a lifetime of investment. Technology democratized lethality. It made hierarchy irrelevant. That's the pivot point we keep revisiting. Whenever war becomes too expensive for most to join, someone figures out how to make it cheap again. And from that moment on, the world changes. In the 14th and 15th centuries, the crossbow created panic for the same reason the drone does today. It required minimal training, ignored armor, and could be produced in workshops rather than forges. It was so effective that the church itself tried to ban it, calling it inhumane. Not because it was cruel, but because it erased the difference between the trained knight and the commoner. That moral outrage disguised a deeper fear, the loss of control. Societies that rely on status fear level playing fields, and war has always been the great leveler. The Hussites of Bohemia would soon prove that on a massive scale, turning farm carts into mobile fortresses to defeat mounted crusaders. But even before them, history had whispered the warning: small resources force big innovations. By the dawn of the industrial age, the pattern had matured into a formula. Massive states built expensive arsenals, while outnumbered forces used agility and bricolage to compensate. Muskets replaced bows, yet the principle stayed constant. Every new invention that promised dominance lasted just long enough for someone to design a workaround in a shed, with fewer materials and less bureaucracy. Militaries, meanwhile, struggle to adapt not because they lack intelligence, but because institutions move slower than necessity. Bureaucracy favors predictability, war rewards surprise. When strategic planning depends on budget cycles and procurement charts, the act of improvisation becomes a threat instead of a skill. The other side, unbound by these rules, experiments freely. And the first time one of their experiments works, entire doctrines collapse. Philosophers like to say armies prepare to fight the last war. In reality, they preserve the last comfort, the illusion that power can be engineered into existence. The wealthier the army, the greater that illusion. The poorer, the more desperate to answer innovation with improvisation. And in war, desperation breeds creativity faster than research grants. The 20th century industrialized this logic. Massive armored vehicles, bombers, and navies demanded staggering investment. Yet in nearly every conflict, somewhere on the battlefield, a handmade or improvised device delivered more effect per dollar than entire government arsenals. Technology advances, but vulnerability never disappears, it simply shifts shape. We like to imagine history as a sequence of breakthroughs, bronze to iron, gunpowder to rifles, aircraft to missiles. But these aren't linear steps upward, they're reactions, each one responding to how the previous advantage was undermined by cheaper ingenuity. The story of progress in war is really a series of humiliations for those who believed progress could be purchased. Behind every celebrated invention stands a future enemy already sketching a counter on a scrap of paper. That's why this pattern isn't just tactical, it's psychological. It punishes arrogance and rewards imagination. Empires rise when they innovate and fall when they confuse wealth for wisdom. If you trace these inflection points, you'll notice they arrive quietly. A soldier experimenting with a new firing formation. A craftsman modifying a weapon no one takes seriously. A group of workers turning farm equipment into armor. The big picture only becomes visible afterward, when historians connect the dots and realize the revolution had been hiding in plain sight. This is the timeless paradox of war. The tools meant to secure dominance always end up teaching the underdog how to defeat them. Perfection breeds complacency, success invites imitation, and the cycle renews itself endlessly. Each generation writes new manuals on how to restore superiority, and each generation learns too late that superiority is temporary. Centuries before modern drones challenged anti-aircraft systems, that same dynamic had already unfolded on muddy European fields. A religious rebellion discovered that defense could also move, that peasants could outthink knights, and that wagon wheels could reshape military history. The lesson was simple but eternal: flexibility beats expense. When Jan Žižka's men hitched their carts into defensive circles and mounted primitive cannons on them, they weren't just resisting crusaders, they were proving the rule we still confront today. War isn't a contest of who spends more, it's the story of who adapts better. Section 2: The Hussite Revolution. Bohemia, early 15th century. Europe is fractured by religion, empire, and class. In one corner of that chaos, a blind commander named Jan Žižka stands before an army made up mostly of peasants and townsmen, people who were never meant to win wars. Against them marched the crusaders of the Holy Roman Empire, knights plated in steel, banners flying, horses armored, confident that faith and finance guarantee victory. They've faced rebellions before, but never like this, because Žižka and his men aren't planning to fight on the knights' terms. The Hussites lack heavy cavalry, proper artillery, or even uniforms. What they have instead are tools of labor: horses, wagons, hammers, and carts, objects of daily survival. Under Žižka's mind, these turn into weapons. He orders the carts reinforced with planks and iron, mounts small cannons on their flanks, and chains the wagons together in rings known as Wagenburgs, literally, wagon castles. Inside these improvised fortresses, his soldiers position crossbowmen and gunners armed with early hand cannons. When the first battle begins, everything about it defies convention. The crusading knights charge forward, confident that mass and momentum will break the rebels. But instead of open formation, they crash into a wall of wagons. Their horses flounder under musket fire and shrapnel from Terrasness and Hofnitzi, short howitzer-like cannons firing from beneath rough wooden covers. The sound is deafening, closer to thunder than battle. Smoke veils the hillside. Crusaders stumble into choke points between chained wagons where Hussite infantry lie in wait with flails and pikes. Within minutes, the unstoppable cavalry splinters, trapped in terrain of the rebels' own design. Žižka's army wins not with numbers or armor, but with rearrangement. He's taken the strongest symbols of medieval power, speed and shock, and neutralized them with geometry and timing. The wagon has become both castle and cannon platform, something between fortress and tank. No one in Europe has ever seen battle wagons used this way. Ordinarily, wagons serve to carry supplies or shield a retreat, not as an offensive weapon. Yet in Žižka's hands, they redefine the battlefield. His Wagenburgs can be rapidly assembled, defensively impenetrable, and then opened for counterattack through carefully placed gaps. When the enemy withdraws, the wagons roll forward, turning defense into pursuit. This setup democratizes war. Peasants who once stood helpless against a mounted knight now fire into their visors from behind cover. Artisans loading powder and shot into cannons become artillery crews overnight. Žižka establishes routines: wagon captains, standard formations, designated flanks. A village craft evolves into organized warfare. Critics at the time dismissed the tactic as primitive, a barricade fight unworthy of professional armies. Yet those words echo centuries later in every war where improvisation defeats prestige. The power of the Wagenburg lies not in sophistication but repetition. It allows outnumbered fighters to hold ground, regroup, and advance methodically. For 15 years, the Hussites repel wave after wave of crusades. Reports from invaders describe near supernatural defense networks, mobile fortresses appearing overnight on open fields, muskets igniting faster than anyone thought possible, peasants outmaneuvering cavalry trains since childhood. Each campaign ends with the same shock: the empire's expense buys no guarantee of triumph. From a distance, these battles look medieval. Up close, they preview modernity. The Hussite Wars introduce combined arms coordination long before anyone names it as doctrine. Crossbows cover artillery reloads, gunmen wedge between spear lines, wagons move like modular armor, the first mechanized units in concept if not in engine. Žižka's genius isn't theoretical. He spends every hour on field experiments. Blindness in one eye, later both, forces him to command by sound and instinct. He standardizes wagon dimensions so repairs and replacements can be made quickly. Crews learn by rhythm: reload, fire, reposition. Every wagon becomes a node in a larger machine, and the sum is greater than any individual knight. The meaning goes beyond tactics. The Hussite movement stems from the execution of the preacher Jan Hus, a revolt tied to faith and nationalism. But its military form transforms rebellion into revolution. For the first time, ordinary citizens armed with cheap weapons and courage can dictate terms to Europe's aristocracy. A spiritual uprising becomes a logistical one. The psychological shock ripples far past Bohemia. Neighboring states scramble to imitate what they mocked. Armories start producing smaller field guns, city militias practice defensive wagon circles, the cost barrier to entering war drops overnight. Everyone learns that effectiveness doesn't depend on wealth, it depends on how intelligently you reuse what you already have. In Zizka's campaigns, the lesson is visible in every spent powder charge. Technology is neutral until imagination claims it. The same gunpowder nobles use for sieges turns into an equalizer in the hands of a blacksmith. The same wagon that carried grain to market transforms into an armored battery. The same social order that ranked men by armor thickness collapses the moment gunfire ignores armor altogether. By the mid-143s after Zizka's death, the Hussite armies fragment absorbed into shifting alliances. But the doctrine they forge lives on. Hoffnitze, their name for those short cannons, evolves linguistically into howitzer. Wagon fortifications inspire later engineers who design moving artillery platforms. Generals studying their records note that controlled mobility paired with firepower consistently beats traditional cavalry assaults. It's the birth certificate of mechanized warfare written in wood and iron. More crucially, it exposes a truth armies still struggle to embrace. Logistics can be weaponized. The Hussites proved that efficiency, a faster reload, a standardized wagon part, and easier repair can outweigh sheer destructive power. Those principles echo through every revolution in military design, from interchangeable musket parts to assembly line tanks, from guerrilla adaptability to drone swarms guided by hobbyist code. And within that revelation sits the paradox that underpins this entire story. The Hussites succeed because they embrace imperfection. Their wagons aren't flawless, they creak, splinter, get stuck in mud. Yet that very imperfection makes them adaptable. You can fix a wagon with nails and rope in minutes. When one breaks, it becomes spare parts. When a cannon misfires, another fires faster. Nothing relies on precision manufacturing. The system endures because each component is expendable. Centuries later, engineers will design modern vehicles and weapons with the opposite philosophy: maximum precision, minimal tolerance for deviation. Zizka would have laughed. Perfection, he'd say, is what kills you first. Because the moment your system stops allowing improvisation, your enemy starts exploiting it. The Hussite Revolution is more than a historical footnote. It's the first industrial age concept born in a pre-industrial world, decentralized resilience. An army of laborers replaces hierarchy with process, capitalizes on cheap reproducibility, and invents mobility without machinery. It turns constraint into power, the purest expression of asymmetric warfare. And though history books focus on its theology or politics, its real legacy is mechanical. Every army that ever fortified a position, mounted guns on vehicles, or synchronized mixed-range weapons owes something to those farmers behind their wagons. In hindsight, Europe underestimated what it witnessed. The wars ended, borders realigned, but the idea escaped. Once simplicity demonstrates superiority, it never disappears, it migrates. From the hills of Bohemia, the logic travels forward in time, waiting to reappear wherever expensive certainty collides with desperate creativity. Because the pattern doesn't stop. A few centuries later, the same logic reemerges, metal replacing wood, engines replacing horses, industry replacing craftsmanship, but the imbalance remains. Once again, great powers believe that machinery ensures dominance, and once again, ordinary fighters prove otherwise. They'll rediscover the hard way that courage and contrivance still outrun budgets. The next revolution in simplicity waits in snow and flame, inside a weapon that costs less than a meal but burns through millions: the Molotov cocktail. Section 3: The Molotov Cocktail and the Fall of the Tank Myth. Winter 1939. A column of Soviet tanks grinds through snow toward the Finnish border, engines growling under mounds of frost. To Moscow, the invasion is a show of dominance, massive, mechanized, unstoppable. Rows of T-26 tanks, icons of modern warfare, glint like beetles under the pale sun. The Soviet command believes nothing smaller than an artillery battery could stop them. But inside those forests, silence hides something far cheaper. Finnish soldiers kneel behind drifts of snow, wool coats blending into the landscape. They're shivering, under-equipped, and outnumbered nearly 4-to-1. Most don't have anti-tank weapons. The few field guns they possess freeze between shots. So they turn to what they do have: bottles, gasoline, and desperation. In field journals, one platoon writes about experimenting with makeshift firebombs. Glass bottles half filled with fuel, corked with rags fitted for quick ignition. When they throw, the results are messy and unpredictable. But when it works, it's terrifying. The Soviets roll forward in formation, believing infantry in loose snow can't threaten armor. Then a burst of flame erupts against a tank vent. Within seconds, fire snakes through the grates and spreads inside the hull. One vehicle halts, another backs into a ditch. Crews scramble out, their silhouettes consumed by heat shimmer. The Finns realize they've found the weakness: the tank's respiratory system. Feed it fire and it chokes on its own air. News of these improvised weapons spreads through units in whispers. They nickname it Molotov cocktail. a mocking signature directed at Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov, who had claimed Soviet planes were only dropping food parcels, not bombs. Each bottle, they joke, is a drink to go with your meal. Crude humor wraps a deadly truth. The most advanced armor division in the world is now vulnerable to liquor bottles and lighter fluid. Tactically, the Molotov is absurdly simple. Gasoline, kerosene, or tar for adhesion, a rag as fuse, a quick light before throw. The chemical reaction costs less than a mark, but the effect is catastrophic. The adhesive flames cling to vents, optics, and exhaust ports, forcing steel monsters to suffocate. Crews either burn or flee. Numbers mean nothing when the battlefield itself turns into a fire trap. Each successful hit echoes through command channels. Soviet generals order adjustments, longer tank columns, infantry support, better ventilation, but adaptation lags behind reality. The Red Army still trains by doctrine written for open plains, not forests where ambushers melt into snowbanks. The Finnish defense forces exploit this relentlessly. They break the tank formations into isolated vehicles, surround them with ski patrols, and attack from close range. Every successful ambush costs Moscow more prestige than resources. The irony runs deep. Tanks had been the miracle weapon of 20th century warfare, the physical manifestation of industrial supremacy. The Great War's muddy stalemates gave birth to them. Interwar theorists idolized them. To own tanks was to own destiny. Knights had their armored horses, empires now had armored engines. Yet all it took to wound that illusion was a hand-thrown flame. In those woods, the myth of mechanical invulnerability froze, burned, and shattered. Eyewitness accounts from Soviet survivors reveal more than tactical failure. They describe fear. Many recall hearing the hiss of ignition before seeing anything. Fire, unpredictable and intimate, replaced artillery as the dominant emotion. You can hear shells, you can anticipate explosions. Fire on your hull erases that predictability. It envelops, crawls, consumes. Soldiers who trusted in armor suddenly felt exposed, trapped inside the very machine that was supposed to save them. Symbolically, the Molotov cocktail inverted everything military progress claimed to achieve. A bottle crafted in a basement now dictated how nations built their tanks. Crews demanded better ventilation systems, external fuel seals, flame suppressors. Engineers redesigned turret hatches and rear armor. Each improvement cost exponentially more than the problem it tried to solve. A 5-cent rag forced multi-million-dollar redesigns. The psychological dimension was even more transformative. The illusion of overwhelming firepower cracked. If a foot soldier could destroy a tank alone, then hierarchy itself became negotiable. Commanders could no longer rely on linear superiority. Every encounter could turn into chaos from a single spark. The lesson was crude but direct. Force is only as strong as its weakest detail, and details can be decoded by those without resources. Across the world, resistance movements took note. During World War II, the same weapon reappears everywhere. Soviet partisans behind German lines, Polish insurgents during the Warsaw Uprising, Spanish Republicans, Greek resistance cells. Each uses a variation, different fuels, thicker glass, sometimes attached chemicals for smoke or delayed burn. The cocktail becomes a handshake shared among underdogs, an announcement that no occupation, however mechanized, is safe from human ingenuity. Meanwhile, nations at the industrial core respond predictably with scale. They build heavier armor, flamethrower tanks, self-sealing lines, and flame-retardant coating. Every adaptation costs fortunes. Each one buys temporary confidence, never permanence. The curve starts again, investment chasing creativity, inventiveness exploiting blind spots. What makes the Molotov story enduring isn't the chemistry, it's the literacy of observation. The Finns didn't invent fire. They recognized where ventilation sat, how armor angled when optics fogged, and from that comprehension crafted a tool perfectly tuned to the machine's habits. It's the same intelligence that centuries earlier turned wagons into fortresses and centuries later mounts explosives on drones. Warfare's innovation rarely revolves around invention, it's about interpretation. By early 194, Soviet forces adapt just enough to grind forward and force peace. But the damage to prestige is permanent. Western observers note that Finland's resistance, armed with little more than rifles and flame bottles, inflicted disproportionate losses on a mechanized giant. The world sees the strategic cost of arrogance quantified, millions in steel undone by playground simplicity. The war propaganda tries to spin it, Molotov cocktails, as anomalies, lucky strikes. Yet their legacy proves otherwise. Post-war conflicts copy the tactic again and again. In Spain's civil war, guerrillas refine its deployment against lighter vehicles. In 1956 Hungary, crowds used the same design to set Soviet tanks ablaze in Budapest streets. Over and over, civilians transform household objects into equalizers. The barrier between soldier and citizen blurs. The bottle's simplicity also carries symbolic weight in politics and protest. Beyond battlefields, it becomes shorthand for rebellion. Students, insurgents, revolutionaries all inherit its image. Because a tool that brings down tanks carries mythology, proof that material imbalance doesn't guarantee submission. In every flicker of that burning liquid lives the same defiance the Hussites once embodied behind their wagons, the insistence that adaptation trumps authority. By the mid-20th century, the weapon's design stabilizes. Manuals quietly circulate among resistance groups, precise ratios of fuel to thickener, the ideal throw distance, the timing of ignition. Armies begin to study them not to use but to defend against them. Flame screens, mesh protection, and reactive armor all trace their lineage to trying to suppress a bottle. The entire evolution of armored warfare pivots around neutralizing what costs less than a meal. From a technological standpoint, the Molotov cocktail marks the moment when mechanization meets its natural limit. You can stack armor, layer materials, add shields, but you can't prevent the human eye from noticing where your vents are. That observant creativity is free and you can't shoot it down with money. Tanks remain formidable pieces of engineering, but ever since the finished snowfields, they carry the memory of fragility inside their design. For the soldiers who used those first bottles, victory wasn't about numbers, it was about restoring agency. Their improvisation turned necessity into narrative. Each flame burst broadcast that survival favors flexibility. That message passes from generation to generation, encoded not in blueprints but in instinct. Study your enemy's expensive solution, then find the cheapest way to break it. The fall of the tank myth didn't end armored warfare. It humanized it. Every fire mark on burnt steel reminds designers that complexity invites counterplay. The same hubris that forged those engines ensures someone somewhere is crafting the next bottle of flames or the next equivalent coated in silicon and rotors. Decades later, soldiers facing guerrillas with RPGs will quote the same misunderstanding Soviet officers voiced in 1939. How did something so crude hit something so advanced? The answer never changes, because in war the equation always balances toward creativity. Wealth builds the structure, but necessity finds the crack. And as the fires of those bottles faded in the snow, another generation of underdogs began dreaming of cheaper ways to fight metal with ingenuity. The factory titan still seemed invincible, but its aura was broken. From that fracture emerged the next translation of the same idea: take the fire, refine it, give it direction. The age of simplicity with explosive intent didn't end in the snow, it evolved into a shoulder-launched revolution. The next weapon would deliver the same lesson through a narrow tube powered by chemistry, a rocket that made armor fear the individual again. Section 4, the RPG era and Vietnam's lesson. By the middle of the 20th century, the bottle had given way to a tube. Steel and propellant replaced glass and gasoline, but the idea stayed the same: make something small that kills something big. The rocket-propelled grenade arrived as a continuation of that principle, not a clean departure. It was a working-class answer to industrial armor. The RPG-2, born in the Soviet Union after World War II, was a simple tube with a shaped charge warhead. It looked primitive compared to guided missiles, but it carried history's favorite advantage: cost. A factory worker could produce one faster than a tank mechanic could tighten a bolt. When the improved RPG-7 appeared a decade later, it could punch through almost half a meter of armor. With one man, one shot, and a few dollars worth of materials, heavy machinery turned vulnerable again. At first, global militaries treated it as a supplemental weapon, handy, not revolutionary. They saw it as insurance for infantry, not the main act. But then came Vietnam. There, on a mosaic of jungles and rice paddies, the concept of the cheap killer reached another climax. The US entered believing in firepower, technology, and air supremacy. Helicopters ferried troops, tanks escorted convoys, gunships prowled the tree line. Each machine represented an investment the size of a small town. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army couldn't match that wealth. What they could do was make it irrelevant. With RPG-2s slung over shoulders and hidden in tunnels, they erased those price tags one ambush at a time. Footage from 1966 shows a CH-47 helicopter descending to deliver supplies. Beneath it, rice paddies shimmer. A single flash arcs up from the tree line, no radar lock, no guidance, just a visual lead and a burst of instinct. The RPG streaks into the fuselage, detonates, and the helicopter folds mid-air like paper. That rocket cost less than fueling the aircraft for an hour. For the crew on the ground, it didn't matter how advanced the enemy was. The sky itself had become a threat again. Throughout the war, RPGs became the signature sound of ambush. Convoys learned to fear the first dull thump followed by rolling echoes. A platoon could spend weeks securing an area, only for one pair of operators to level it in seconds. US armor that survived artillery now crumpled under hand-launched explosives. M113 carriers, light tanks, even river patrol boats, all targets. Soldiers started bolting mesh to their vehicles, hanging sandbags or spare tracks as improvised shields, repeating centuries-old patterns of adaptation. The scale imbalance was devastating. Each US tank averaged hundreds of thousands of dollars, not including transport, maintenance, and crew. Each RPG shell cost under 20. Even a failed shot forced hesitation. Helicopter pilots rose higher, tank crews hunkered lower, movement slowed. Material superiority began working against itself, weighed down by its own fear. There's a story recounted by veterans of the Ia Valley. A patrol was trapped when their armored column took a direct hit from an unseen team. The first rocket pierced a track, the second hit the rear hatch. The soldier describing it years later said what unsettled him most wasn't the explosion, it was how quiet the reload was. He never saw who fired. The jungle absorbed the sound, then exhaled destruction. That silence, more than the blast, changed tactics forever. RPG teams learned mobility as religion. 2 fighters, 1 tube, 3 rockets, constant relocation. Their entire operation cost less than the radio in a helicopter cockpit. Technology didn't disappear, it just lost relevance in the wrong environment. In dense terrain, stealth and speed ruled again. Tanks built for European plains had no purpose among bamboo and mud. American analysts documented the trend but often misread it. Reports described guerrilla luck or local advantage. What they overlooked was systemic efficiency. The RPG wasn't random, it was optimized evolution. Decades of global post-war design converged on that geometry: the Venturi tube, the shaped charge, the reusable launcher, each detail gutting the idea that high complexity equals progress. Outside Vietnam, the same weapon rewrote doctrine in every conflict it touched. In Afghanistan during the 198s, Mujahideen used RPG-7s to harass Soviet convoys winding through narrow valleys. Shots escaped from crevices, struck fuel trucks, detonated chain reactions that shut highways for days. The cost exchange was obscene. A few dollars of propellant blanked out columns worth millions. Afghanistan turned into a proving ground of asymmetry. The same dynamic the Soviets had watched decades earlier in Finland now replayed against them. Operational manuals began to adapt. NATO forces incorporated anti-RPG cages, reactive panels, and standoff armor. Engineers designed intricate defenses. Insurgents wired dual fuses to break those protections. Every iteration reinforced the same truth, that every advancement only lives until someone cheap breaks it. Psychologically, this period sealed the death of technological certainty. Soldiers no longer assumed armor meant survival. Every patrol carried tension, every shadow could hold a tube. The emotional weight mirrored what tank crews felt in the Winter War, the dread of an unseen opponent turning their perceived power into liability. Hidden behind that tube was rarely a trained soldier. It could be a teenager, a farmer, a mechanic, anyone determined enough to lift the launcher. The battlefield democratized once more. For the industrial world, the image was humiliating. Propaganda could spin ideology but not arithmetic. When millions in research collapsed under a fraction of that in ammunition, even policymakers understood they were fighting economics as much as enemies. The RPG's longevity, still in use decades later, proved that affordability isn't a weakness, its endurance materialized. Militaries reacted predictably, pouring billions into countermeasures. Active protection systems, radar detection, explosive tiles that pre-detonate incoming rockets. Each layer worked for a season, then met a counter that cost pocket change. The race, once industrial, turned mathematical, cost versus creativity. The cheaper side kept winning. In a deeper sense, RPG warfare exposed an uncomfortable cultural divide. Industrial nations designed weapons for control, precision strikes, predictable impact, traceable data. Their opponents used weapons built for chaos, ambushes, uncertainty, and improvisation. Control always cost energy, chaos costs nothing. That's why insurgencies thrive, they spend emotion where empires spend resources. In the jungles of Vietnam, that philosophy colored daily life. For many US troops, engagements turned into waiting games. Any road bend could host a launcher, any tree line could breathe fire. The battlefield expanded vertically down into tunnels, up into canopy, erasing the technological advantage of clear sightlines. In that maze, the RPG became the voice of equality. Every detonation reminded both sides that annihilation doesn't have to be expensive to be effective. After the war, the weapon traveled globally: Angola, Lebanon, Chechnya, Iraq, each conflict another footnote in the saga of low beating high. The tube evolved only slightly, yet its psychological signature remained unchanged. The hiss before the blast, the sense that preparedness means nothing against ingenuity. By the time militaries retooled for the 21st century, the RPG era had already embedded its lesson deep in doctrine. Training programs began acknowledging cost asymmetry as a strategic factor. Analysts coined new phrases like low-cost lethality and distributed denial. But these were just academic efforts to rationalize what soldiers had known since the first launcher fired. That simplicity endures because complexity eventually collapses under its own price. And in a way, the RPG was prophetic. It bridged the gap between human-held tools and remote systems. Aimed by eye, balanced by hand, yet using shaped charge science precise enough to shame computing systems. It was the last great analog equalizer before digital warfare began. When later generations talk about drones, about $600 craft diving into multi-million-dollar armor, they're describing the same physics of asymmetry, only rendered in plastic and software instead of steel and TNT. The RPG wrote the manual for all of them: maximize portability, minimize cost, and make adaptation easier than defense. So when those trails of smoke arced over jungles half a century ago, they weren't just destroying machines, they were sketching the future contours of war. Every explosion built toward a conclusion still unfolding today. In combat, innovation's purest form is not invention but subtraction. Strip away weight, cost, and ego until only function remains, and you'll outlast every empire that forgot what necessity feels like. Section 5. Improvised Explosives and the Age of IEDs. Early 200s Western Iraq. A convoy of armored vehicles snakes down a paved road under the shimmer of desert heat. Radio chatter hums steady, the air smells of engine oil and dust. Each truck carries layers of armor, electronic countermeasures, sensors that can pick up radio signals from miles away. Billions of dollars in research move at 10 miles an hour, then without warning the third vehicle erupts. A flash beneath the axle, a shockwave rippling outward, steel folding like paper. An improvised explosive device, just a few pounds of fertilizer, metal scraps, and wire, has done in one instant what entire insurgent campaigns failed to do: stop the machine dead. That blast defines a generation of warfare. The IED, the modern heir to centuries of cheap ingenuity, becomes the signature weapon of the 21st century. It takes the lessons of the Molotov and the RPG and plants them beneath the earth, transforming roads into ambushes and routine patrols into constant gambles. For militaries used to dominance in the air and precision on the ground, it's a nightmare no algorithm can cure. In Iraq and Afghanistan, the mathematics of cost reach absurd proportions. A single roadside bomb often costs under $100 to assemble, common fertilizer for explosive compound, a blasting cap from mining supplies, a damaged cell phone as trigger. Each destroyed vehicle might cost $500,000 to several million, not counting the price of deployment, fuel, and armor retrofits. Strategically, the imbalance is relentless. Insurgents can plant thousands. The coalition must defend everywhere simultaneously. At first, commanders treat them as random hazards. Improvised suggests disorder, but patterns emerge quickly: roads chosen for predictability, choke points repeated, decoys used to lure engineers. The unseen enemy watches behavior the way a physicist watches motion, mapping where soldiers feel safe, then inverting it. The most dangerous stretch becomes wherever routine creeps in. Every convoy moves differently after that. Drivers fix eyes on asphalt cracks, gunners study rooftops, silence replaces conversation. You can armor a truck, but you can't armor nerves. Soldiers describe driving through towns so quiet that wind on shattered windows sounds like warning. Some call it the tyranny of anticipation, the understanding that any bump might be death, that the enemy's cheapest creation controls your speed, your route, your rhythm. The technology race begins again. The US and coalition forces pour billions into counter-IED programs. Signal jammers to block remote detonation, specialized mine-resistant vehicles with V-shaped hulls to deflect blasts, massive databases cataloging bomb signatures through fragments recovered from craters. Contractors flood bases with experimental scanners and robotic diffusers. Every month, new prototypes arrive, promising safety through circuitry. Yet the bombs keep evolving faster. Insurgents shift to pressure plates instead of cell phones. They connect primitive tripwires, then infrared sensors scavenge from garage doors. When jammers succeed, builders go mechanical, handmade triggers invisible to electromagnetic sweeps. When metal detectors advance, they use plastic casings. The cat and mouse accelerates, innovation migrates from laboratories back to basements. Creativity again outweighs budget. To the engineers designing countermeasures, it feels Sisyphean. Each success lasts weeks. To the fighters planting explosives, it's personal education. The field becomes a classroom where every failure is data. Behind the anonymity of scattered road bombs lies surprising sophistication, a decentralized research network teaching itself through trial and error without bureaucracy slowing it down. The insurgent with a shovel functions like an R&D department, his bomb and open-source contribution shared across continents online. Meanwhile, the psychological toll on soldiers grows heavier than armor plating. Many recall how time itself warped during routes, minutes stretching into eternities, concentration carving grooves of paranoia. Some develop rituals, tapping dashboards, holding breath at intersections, counting seconds between Humvee shocks. Even when no explosion comes, the threat erodes endurance. Combat stress morphs into dread of the unseen, just as fire once did for tank crews and rockets for helicopter pilots. The weapon's true efficiency lies not just in destruction, but in the anticipation it generates. Commanders adapt with new tactics, unpredictable convoys, aerial transport, local intelligence. Yet every adaptation increases logistical strain. Patrols shrink to minimize exposure, bases become isolated behind blast walls, interaction with civilians essential for long-term stability diminishes. The cheap bomb achieves a strategic inversion. With almost no cost, it forces advanced militaries to contract, to guard rather than move. Time becomes another casualty. There's a paradox hidden here. High-tech warfare depends on movement, airlift, supply chains, constant rotation. The IED stalls everything, its power rests in stillness. A passive object sits in dust, invisible until activated, but its mere existence changes planning across entire regions. For the first time since industrial warfare began, the most decisive weapon demands no operator at the moment of kill. The battlefield extends into absence. Each blast tells the same story, the return of low-tech logic. Like the Wagenburg, like the bottle, like the rocket, the improvised bomb works because it exploits expectation. Technology organizes, simplicity disrupts. The more sensors armies add, the more variables they must interpret. A yellow jerrycan by the road might be garbage or catastrophe. The uncertainty drains focus and money at the same rate. Analysts back home crunch data obsessively. Cost per casualty, success rate of new armor designs, frequency of attacks by province. Yet none of those graphs capture the underlying shift, war's center of gravity moving from weapon to environment. Armies used to own battlefields, now the battlefield owns them. Every road, every culvert, every grassy patch becomes suspect. The IED turns geography itself into an opponent. Behind each detonation lies human adaptation under pressure. Many bomb makers are former mechanics or farmers repurposing skill sets. They know soil density, wire conductivity, fuse timing. They don't see themselves as insurgent geniuses, just craftsmen applying logic. That's what terrifies strategists most, the ordinariness of it. When expertise is that accessible, deterrence melts. Anyone with curiosity can study online diagrams, then sculpt devastation with household tools. For the populations caught between sides, the consequences are devastating. Civilian casualties mount, roads close, commerce collapses, but paradoxically each restriction deepens the weapon's reach. Economic paralysis becomes extension of the blast radius. When travelers fear highways, control shifts from armies to absence. It's an occupation enforced by nothing more than potential energy under dirt. By 2007, the counter-IED budget across coalition forces surpasses $30 billion. Yet explosives remain the top cause of casualties. Intelligence networks intercept shipments, drones patrol roads, but simplicity keeps winning. High-energy lasers prototype as bomb neutralizers only to fail under dust storms. Sophisticated ground-penetrating radars jam against cluttered terrain. The imbalance remains cosmic, complexity stumbling over cost efficiency. In military academies, analysts start rephrasing history. They realize the IED is not new, it's the consequence of every previous adaptation compressed into one device. The wagon gave infantry cover, the bottle gave them ignition, the rocket gave them reach. The bomb unites them all under one law, decentralization. Warfare has diffused from hierarchies to individuals. Each person becomes potential manufacturer, strategist, and executioner. Soldiers on the ground cope in dark humor. They nickname roads route hope, route fear, route death. A driver once said the safest feeling came only after passing the site of an explosion, because lightning rarely strikes twice. That remark, half joke, half fatalism, captures the essence of this era, safety defined by where catastrophe has already occurred. Back in defense offices, PowerPoints multiply. Terms like asymmetric threat, networked insurgency, and left-of-boom strategy become official language. But those words are abstraction layered over a simpler fact: the empire of cost keeps losing to the republic of improvisation. A battlefield once measured in square kilometers is now measured in imagination. When troops finally withdraw, the devices remain. Unexploded bombs embedded in soil outlast politics and occupation. Children mistake them for toys, farmers hit them with plows. Long after connection to ideology fades, the weapon persists as environment. That permanence reveals what all cheap weapons share: they survive longer than their inventors. Bottles burn out, rockets rust, but explosives buried cheap endure for generations, monuments to imbalance. In a sense, the age of IEDs is less about explosives than about appropriation. Every wire, sensor, and trigger is recycled technology from civilian life. The lines between war and commerce blur completely. Phones become detonators, batteries become fuses, radios become shields. Exactly as drones will later inherit components from hobbies, the bomb inherits from agriculture and repair shops. The same ingenuity that fixes tractors now ruptures convoys. By the end of the decade, the lesson crystallizes in policy papers but rarely in philosophy. Protection costs far more than threat. For every dollar spent on armor, a few cents reinvent resistance. History hasn't advanced, it's looped back to the same equilibrium the Hussites found on muddy ground and that every cheap weapon since has confirmed. The bottle became a rocket, the rocket became a buried charge, now both prepare the way for what fights above. The tools differ, but the arithmetic never changes. And when security analysts review footage of convoys crawling through danger zones, they see not technological regression, but the purest expression of warfare's constant truth. The enemy who can improvise faster dictates the pace. The one chasing perfection is already too late. That truth glows beneath the dust, wiring buried deep waiting for pressure. The IED is the century's echo of every peasant cannon, every flaming bottle, every handheld rocket. It's the explosion that says what history already knew, that power priced too high eventually kneels to ingenuity priced too low. Section 6, the rise of the drone battlefield. It starts quietly the same way every new era of warfare does, not with a declaration but a curiosity. In 2015, a hobbyist mounts a camera on a quadcopter and realizes it can chase targets. No one pays attention. A decade later, that same technology conducts battlefield strikes across continents. The sky is now crowded with machines that cost less than a motorcycle, yet determine the outcome of million-dollar defenses. Drones were supposed to be tools of surveillance, eyes in the air. But once a few mechanics learned to swap cameras for explosives, the role changed. They became hands instead. At first, military analysts dismissed them as toys. Low range, small payload, easy to jam. Then the footage began to mount. Vehicles destroyed, trenches cleared, armor pierced, all by crafts assembled from civilian parts. The turning point came in Ukraine and Syria. Frontlines filled with the hum of small propellers. First-person view drones, FPVs guided by goggles, swooping between ruins, diving into tanks, and threading through windows to find soldiers hiding in stairwells. Every video told the same story, precision born from improvisation. For under $600, operators achieved effects that used to require aircraft worth millions. Analysts calculated the cost ratio and went silent. A single FPV with a converted mortar shell could cripple artillery or demolish logistics hubs. Every success multiplied because replacement was trivial. Production lines didn't exist, living rooms became factories. 3D printers built spare frames, soldering kits repaired circuits, batteries recharged overnight. Entire combat units operated with the economics of a hobby club. The low barrier unleashed creativity faster than any central command could predict. Field engineers redesigned frames for wind stability, programmers rewrote open-source flight code to avoid jamming, electronics shops in cities became supply depots. With every adaptation, commercial tech turned a battlefield into a makerspace. Soldiers didn't wait for procurement, they built. What makes the drone era so disruptive isn't just affordability, it's accessibility. Anyone with a laptop and parts catalog can replicate results once restricted to state militaries. The cycle that began with peasants arming wagons completes its evolution in Silicon. Ingenuity now scales globally, spread through tutorial videos and online forums rather than secret labs. In the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, reports suggest as many as 60 to 70% of battlefield casualties involve drones of some kind. Not all are FPVs, but their influence shapes every movement. Infantry no longer dares to cluster, armor moves only under camouflage nets. A buzzing sound overhead triggers automatic panic, it could be reconnaissance or guided death. The line between observation and attack has vanished. Operators describe the experience like playing a racing game, except the score is irreversible. They strap on goggles, see through the drone's eyes, and guide it through corridors of smoke. The last second of footage target sighted detonation gets uploaded as propaganda, instruction, and morale booster all at once. Each clip becomes both weapon and message, proof that agility still beats wealth. Governments scramble to respond. Electronic warfare teams deploy jammers that flood radio frequencies, nets stretch across depots, mobile radars scan for silhouettes smaller than birds. Yet the pattern repeats, but now with absurd arithmetic. Each countermeasure costs millions, each drone costs hundreds. Every air defense array that drains a generator can be defeated by a handful of batteries scavenged from e-bikes. Builders plug in frequency-hopping transmitters or semi-autonomous routing that keeps flying through interference, rewriting in minutes what took defense labs years to prototype. Budgets chase adaptability and always arrive late, burning fortunes just to stay level with garage ingenuity. The irony deepens because militaries themselves depend on commercial technology. GPS modules, lithium batteries, infrared cameras, all from the same production chains civilians use. In trying to fight off cheap drones, advanced armies must buy derivatives of the very parts they fear. Supply chains blur the line between attacker and defender. The same factory that powers mobile phones fuels asymmetry in war. Strategically, drones return battle to a human scale. One operator can decide the fate of a column. Command decentralizes, initiative migrates downward. High command plans offensives, but the decisive moment happens wherever a pilot finds an opening through the headset. It's the tactical democracy the Hussites once demonstrated on the ground, now airborne. Cities become laboratories of adaptation. In Mariupol, Bakhmut, Aleppo, every structure hides counters or launch pads. Soldiers repurpose sewer pipes as antenna shields, fill windows with mesh to disrupt approach vectors, cover rooftops with smoke to confuse thermal cameras. The war of attrition shifts from material to creativity. Victory isn't who builds more drones, it's who learns faster each week. To outsiders, the footage looks like science fiction reversed. Not sleek aircraft cutting through clouds, but buzzing insects performing precision kills among ruins. Yet the principles mirror medieval logic: small mobility beating heavy armor, cost efficiency dismantling prestige. The more advanced a target is, the more visible it becomes to a $600 eye. Pilots talk about mixing ingenuity with emotion. Some are soldiers by rank, others volunteers. They crowdfund parts, print insignias on 3D shells, dedicate missions to fallen friends. The act of flight becomes personal craftsmanship, half engineering, half vengeance. That intimacy gives endurance money can't buy. When resources deplete, morale carries the experiment forward. Logistically, the results reshape supply theory. Armies that once funneled industrial production into centralized factories now mimic decentralized networks. Ukraine's drone army initiative disperses manufacturing across garages and small firms. The model mirrors open-source software, updates shared, tested, and improved collectively. Bureaucracy, rarely a weapon's friend, has finally been sidelined by necessity. On the opposing side, similar improvisation thrives. Russian and allied units form ad hoc drone detachments, modifying consumer models with fragmentation charges or adapting long-range drones for kamikaze strikes. Both sides learn simultaneously, copying each other's blueprints almost in real time. The cycle moves faster than any official doctrine review. Warfare becomes viral. The psychological landscape transforms with it. Soldiers once feared ambush from below, now they fear observation from above. Continuous buzzing saturates the mind. Some report hearing phantom drones even in silence, a new kind of combat fatigue mirroring early reports of shell shock. Sleep, movement, and communication all hinge on acoustic cues. Against invisible enemies, the battlefield never turns off. Economically, the imbalance borders on comedy and collapse at once. Defense industries built on billion-dollar contracts now face an impossible question. How do you sell protection when threat costs pocket change? For the price of one advanced missile system, an adversary can field thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of lethal quadcopters. The cost curve no longer favors side or strategy, it simply laughs, rewarding whoever spends least. Deterrence itself wobbles under the math. Experts already warn of the next escalation: swarms. Dozens or hundreds of autonomous micro-drones coordinating like flocks, overwhelming sensors through sheer quantity. Each one essentially worthless alone, unstoppable together. It's the Wagenburg inverted: mobility replacing defense, quantity replacing armor. Once again, cheap replicability rewrites tactics faster than ethics can respond. What history reveals through drones is repetition with higher resolution. The Hussite wagon fortified people, the Molotov threw fire, the RPG compressed explosives into a shoulder shot, the IED buried ingenuity underground. Now the drone carries all of them at once: mobility, ignition, penetration, detonation, condensed into plastic wings. It is every previous adaptation lifted into the sky. For militaries admiring their fleets of jets and tanks, that realization lands hard. The airspace that once promised dominance now exposes vulnerability. The logic of superiority flips upside down. High altitude is irrelevant when war operates at fence height, between trees and telephone lines, navigated by people who learned flying through video games. Every historical pattern converges here. When cost collapses, creativity multiplies. When creativity multiplies, control erodes. The sky that industrial war once owned now belongs equally to anyone with soldered wires and intent. You can jam frequencies, but you can't jam curiosity. And that, more than any payload, is what defies billion-dollar defenses. So when a 40 million missile battery misses a $600 drone, it isn't just malfunction, it's financial theater. It's prophecy written in flame and receipts. The machine on the hill is reenacting the oldest illusion in warfare: the belief that cost equals competence, that a spreadsheet can stop ingenuity. The humming propellers above aren't anomalies, their history's laughter echoing through circuitry, mechanical heirs to wagons, bottles, rockets, and roads reborn as weapons. In that realization lies the true upheaval. The drone age isn't an upgrade, it's recursion. War has circled back to its oldest rule: whoever adapts cheapest wins fastest. The rest is just altitude. Section 7: The $40 million Shield. The hum of generators echoes across an airfield at dawn. Rows of antennas rise like metallic reeds. Screens pulse with static outlines of sky. Operators sit behind consoles, ready to engage a new kind of enemy, one they can barely see. This is the modern fortress, an anti-drone defense system worth tens of millions. Its promise is absolute awareness, absolute control. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, a handful of quadcopters wait to prove how fragile that promise is. The gulf between offense and defense has never looked so absurd. On one side, the economics of hobby kits, on the other, the culmination of national budgets. In a single installation, radar arrays sweep 360 degrees, machine learning algorithms filter noise from birds, laser turrets pivot with sub-millimeter precision. These systems, marketed as counter-UAS or C-UAS, represent military optimism condensed into hardware. The price tag can climb to $40 million for coverage of a few square kilometers. They are meant to be shields for an age of insects. The story of the 40 million shield begins with belief, the conviction that technology can solve what adaptation starts. Governments worldwide have poured unprecedented sums into defeating small drones. The US alone budgeted nearly $700 million for research and development by 2023, launching joint projects across its military branches. Europe fields its own programs like the Aladdin Initiative, designed to integrate police surveillance with AI threat assessment. India unveils Indrajal, a fully autonomous system claiming to protect 1,000 square kilometers through layered sensors and auto-response algorithms. Each new product claims to end the cheap drone problem once and for all. None has succeeded. Inside a control room, the process feels clinical. Detections appear as icons. When a drone enters airspace, the system classifies it within seconds: shape, signal, trajectory. Commands go out: jam frequency, engage laser, deploy interceptor. On paper, it's seamless. In atmosphere, it's chaos. Jamming range fluctuates with humidity, lasers scatter against fog, radar signatures vanish among metallic clutter. A drone built of plastic and foam can become invisible to billion-dollar eyes simply by flying low. The contradictions pile up. Directed energy weapons boast instant response and limitless ammunition, yet depend on clear weather and stable power grids. RF jammers block control signals, but also risk shutting down friendly communications. Even AI, the latest mantle of modern defense, stumbles when drones maneuver erratically or use pre-programmed routes without emissions to trace. Every solution assumes predictability. Every enemy learns to behave unpredictably. Field data captures the imbalance. In 2024, test ranges reported that high-powered jammers could disable most commercial drones within 2 kilometers, until modified drones switched to autonomous flight, evading interference entirely. A single software patch erased millions of dollars in advantage. That's the quiet battlefield the public rarely sees: programmers defeating defense contracts with open-source code. Economically, the anti-drone industry is booming. Analysts estimate the global market to surpass $10 billion before 2003, growing more than 26% annually. Defense firms advertise layered domes of protection: radar, RF, electro-optical sensors, kinetic interceptors, and directed energy, all fused through data networks. The brochures speak of holistic airspace security. Yet beneath the marketing language, engineers confess that no system guarantees full coverage. For every layer added, cost rises exponentially while reliability gains incrementally. The equation mirrors every earlier arms race, each new fortress heavier than the one it replaces. The irony is palpable: the same technological abundance that builds offense forces defense into exhaustion. Militaries field C-UAS units at bases, ports, even stadiums. Portable versions guard world events and summits, but each deployment reveals hidden expenses: personnel training, calibration, maintenance under field conditions. Lasers require clean optics, radar arrays need constant tuning, algorithms demand continuous dataset updates. The enemy, meanwhile, just recharges batteries. When operators describe actual engagements, the conversations sound eerily familiar to veterans of older wars. A drone approaches, sensors detect too late, interference misfires. By the time the system responds, the object has already crashed into its target. Afterwards, analysts dissect the footage, isolating milliseconds of failure. Sometimes it's human hesitation, sometimes algorithmic confusion. Always the same moral: cost doesn't buy time, only complexity. India's Indrajal offers one of the most ambitious examples. It integrates 15 different countermeasures: radar, radio infrared, EO/IR cameras, and AI processors to create an autonomous kill web. In trials, it successfully tracked multiple drones simultaneously, yet every added sensor multiplies potential errors. Rain creates false positives, power fluctuations cascade. Autonomous defense, far from reducing chaos, occasionally amplifies it. European experiments echo the problem. The Aladdin project feeds real-time data from border patrols to predictive algorithms. Officials praise its precision, while quietly admitting it's still vulnerable to swarms. Because when 20 or 30 drones move together, computational load skyrockets. Pattern recognition turns into noise. The defense grid, built to handle discrete threats, chokes on abundance. The mirror image of the Wagenburg encircled by cavalry, only this time the charge comes from above. The United States invests in directed energy, the dream of burning drones mid-flight with invisible beams. Test footage looks cinematic: red lasers slicing the sky, targets dissolving mid-air. But real weather doesn't resemble test ranges. Dust diffuses beams, moisture saps intensity, mobile platforms can't carry enough power for sustained use. Each laser intercept costs thousands in electricity, and every failure invites thousands more in analysis. What's touted as infinite ammunition becomes finite patience. Meanwhile, adversaries expand. Non-state actors watch, replicate, and adapt. As soon as one country demonstrates a new deterrent, diagrams circulate online showing how to bypass it, alter flight altitude, adjust materials, change frequency bands. It's open-source arms development running on curiosity rather than payroll. The more expensive the shield becomes, the cheaper the spear grows in comparison. This imbalance creates a kind of strategic vertigo. Commanders face two competing truths: ignore drones and risk destruction, or chase them and bleed budgets dry. There's no equilibrium, only exhaustion. Defense turns into perpetual beta testing. Armies accustomed to clear hierarchies now juggle overlapping technologies, each demanding specialists, each promising supremacy, each defeated by a toy sold online. For soldiers on the ground, these contradictions manifest as hesitation. Anti-drone screens flicker, alarms blare, but sometimes units hesitate to fire because they can't verify if the object approaching is hostile. In a war where cheap surveillance drones outnumber combat ones, false alarms become routine. The term drone fatigue joins military vocabulary, constant alertness eroding accuracy. It echoes psychological accounts from anti-IED forces decades earlier. Fear not of explosion, but of endless potential. Economists studying warfare call this the inversion of efficiency. Historically, the advantage belonged to whoever produced destruction more cheaply. Today, the defender pays infinitely more to prevent finite threats. The asymmetry has shifted from battlefield to budget office. Every drone intercepted validates the spending. Every one that slips through questions the entire paradigm. In the halls of procurement, engineers propose remedies. Network defense clouds, shared databases of drone signatures, AI models trained on millions of flight patterns. The buzzwords accumulate, but the pattern stays unchanged. Complexity breeds dependency, dependency slows learning, innovation migrates to whoever moves lighter. The shield grows heavier until it can't lift itself. Episodes on active fronts make this dilemma stark. Near major cities, expensive drone defenses sit idle when power grids fail. Portable jammers overheat after continuous use. Troops revert to ancient tactics, smoke screens, camouflage, decoys, methods as old as warfare itself. High technology collapses back into low, full circle. It's the same regression every age endures after over-engineering. And therein lies the quiet symbolism of these $40 million systems. They're not monuments to security, they're monuments to fear, physical embodiments of our refusal to accept that control is temporary. Each radar pulse, each algorithmic scan announces more about human anxiety than enemy capability. We build fortresses because we can't endure uncertainty, not because fortresses win wars. By 2025, defense analysts admit the obvious. Anti-drone solutions can only manage risk, not eliminate it. The official phrase becomes acceptable mitigation, bureaucratic code for resignation. Reports praise incremental successes, improved detection rates, reduced false alarms, but behind the language lingers fatigue. The war against cheapness cannot be won by expense. And yet research continues, because to stop would be to concede that the cycle itself is the real adversary. Wealthy nations cannot imagine defense without consumption. Poorer fighters cannot imagine survival without improvisation. Both sides fuel each other infinitely. The 40 million shield thus functions less as hardware and more as parable, proof that sophistication enslaved to expectation dissolves under simplicity unrestricted by rules. Somewhere another drone lifts off, its rotors flickering against sunrise. Controllers recalibrate sensors, algorithms stretch to predict its path. It doesn't matter if they succeed this time or fail. The imbalance already stands recorded, a ledger written in zeros and flames. Because every intercept costs more than every launch and mathematics doesn't take sides. In the end, the anti-drone revolution teaches the same lesson as every chapter before it. Power always overbuilds until lightness topples it. The Hussites knew it with wagons, Finnish soldiers knew it with bottles, guerrillas knew it with rockets and wires. The price may rise with every century, but the outcome never changes. The real battle isn't between drone and laser, it's between simplicity and the illusion of control. Section 8, Fear from Above. Out on the front lines, soldiers have learned to keep their eyes on the sky. It isn't superstition, it's survival. The soft hum of a quadcopter, barely audible through wind and gunfire, has become the most dreaded sound of the modern battlefield. You can't tell if it's scouting, recording, or armed, and by the time you know, it's too late. For centuries, fighting meant scanning horizons for motion. Now the danger comes from angles eyes were never built to monitor. Above, behind clouds, beyond sight. Every moment outdoors carries the possibility that someone miles away is watching through a camera lens no bigger than a coin. The threat has evolved from tangible to psychological. Soldiers call it drone stress. In interview footage from Ukraine, one remarks, "You don't sleep, every hum in your head could be another one." It sounds like exaggeration until doctors confirm the pattern. Symptoms mirror those once diagnosed as shell shock, hyper-alertness, insomnia, loss of appetite, shaky hands. The difference is rhythm. Shelling arrives in waves, drones in permanence. There's no safe pause between attacks, no predictable interval. The sky's silence itself becomes menacing. Psychologists studying field reports describe a new form of combat fatigue. It's anticipatory, continuous, and largely invisible. Troops spend hours under netting, ears tuned for frequency changes, aware that even a curious pause in buzzing could mean a dive attack. The mind refashions all noise into warning, rustling leaves, electric lines, distant engines. When threat is that constant, fear reshapes perception itself. Commanders recognize the pattern but struggle to address it. Traditional morale programs rely on rest and distance from front lines, yet drones erase boundaries. Surveillance stretches into safe zones. Soldiers rest under roofs still penetrated by sensors. The front follows them home. Sleep becomes negotiation, not recovery. Civilians share the same anxiety. In towns within range of skirmishes, people reorganize daily life around flight noise. Farmers time fieldwork to lull periods. Children learn to distinguish friend from foe by rotor tone. Psychiatrists speak of drone buzz conditioning. The body flinches before the conscious mind processes danger. The hum becomes Pavlovian panic. What's striking is how little damage a drone needs to inflict to dominate a region. Even reconnaissance models reshape behavior. Armies travel by night, villagers avoid markets, supply convoys pause beneath overhangs. Entire logistics schedules bend around small devices nobody can see. Power measured in fear costs nothing to generate. The echoes of older wars keep resurfacing. In World War I, soldiers learned to read the whistle of an incoming shell, tin helmets pressed tight as they awaited impact. The dread then was punctual, a countdown. Today's dread has no countdown, just continuity. Tiny rotors replace artillery whistles, same terror removed from rhythm. The medical responses trace familiar paths. Field clinics test therapies borrowed from post-traumatic stress programs, grounding exercises, sleep cycles, controlled exposure to recorded propeller sounds. Some reduce symptoms, others fail spectacularly because the trigger persists outside clinics. You can desensitize a soldier to noise, but not to uncertainty. Researchers working alongside units talk about the new saturation. Every generation of warfare brings its sensory overload, cannon thunder, machine gun bursts, helicopter blades. The drone combines all into a whisper. Its danger lies in subtlety. You can't fight what you can't recognize, and absence exhausts faster than confrontation. Digital media amplifies the toll. Strike footage circulates online within minutes, merging battlefield and broadcast. Soldiers often encounter recordings of their own positions taken by enemy drones before those attacks even occur. The result is psychological recursion. Watching the instrument of your fear on repeat, knowing you may feature next. That loop extends trauma beyond geography. Commanders attempt mitigation through technology, acoustic detectors, signal scanners, automatic alerts, but these tools play the same double game as anti-IED systems once did. They confirm threats' presence without nullifying it. Each detection tone only reminds troops how surrounded they are. In human terms, defense becomes acknowledgement, not relief. Civilian life adapts awkwardly. Some communities develop local codes, church bells signifying clear skies, market horns announcing safe windows for movement. Sound, once carrying cultural meaning, now translates aerial status updates. The medieval village returns, only its watchtower points upward. Inside trenches, humor becomes armor. Soldiers joke that drones have personalities. Sergi for the one that lingers, B for the one that buzzes over food lines. Naming the machines humanizes them just enough to cope. Old veterans compare this with naming shells or mortars during bombardment. The tactic is ancient, turn thunder into conversation so fear stays at arm's length. Still, cracks show. Interviews reveal staggering burnout rates among operators and targets alike. Drone pilots, even remote ones, face mirrored stress. For them, the constant feed of destruction induces detachment, then guilt. They describe dreams filled with camera crosshairs. The further technology pushes combatants from the field, the closer it brings consequences to their minds. Distance, paradoxically, tightens intimacy. Among civilians, sociologists record behavioral adaptations resembling wartime folklore. Rules pass between neighbors about how to move, when to leave lights off, where to park under trees. Resilience manifests as ritual. Each generation invents new customs to survive invisible dangers. It's the same pattern that history repeats whenever warfare exceeds human scale. People re-domesticate it through habit. Ethicists studying modern conflict notice something else. Drones, by lowering risk to operators, prolong wars that would otherwise exhaust aggressors. Safety for one side deepens exposure for the other. Psychological suffering migrates downward the hierarchy to those observed, hunted, or pathologically waiting. The asymmetry becomes emotional as much as tactical. Militaries now acknowledge mental health as part of counter-drone doctrine. Training manuals include sensory drills, recognizing tones, identifying flight patterns to reclaim perception through familiarity. Yet even instructors admit the futility. Machines evolve faster than minds adapt. The enemy doesn't need to kill to win, it just needs to hover long enough. That realization shapes strategy more than any statistic. If fear from above paralyses movement, control shifts automatically. The side causing anxiety dictates pace without expenditure. Psychologists call it learned immobility, strategists might call it a victory condition. The cost is measured in silence, roads empty, fields unused, hours without motion. Interestingly, the dynamic mirrors ancient sieges but inverted. Instead of walls trapping armies inside, invisible pressure pins them beneath sky. Drones achieve what catapults once did, relentless presence eroding will. Only the texture changes from stone to static, from flaming pitch to pixelated coordinates. Cultural responses emerge too. Music composed in war zones samples drone propellers as percussion. Filmmakers treat buzzing as leitmotif for dread. Art follows fear, documenting evolution of anxiety the way murals once recorded cavalry charges. History writes itself first through imagination, then through mourning. Field chaplains report confessions filled with guilt not from killing, but from surviving by inaction. Soldiers describe freezing rather than shooting, overwhelmed by simultaneous deterrence and invisibility. The hum above dictates instincts, overriding tactics. You can order courage, but not calm. At higher command levels, this psychological erosion alters policy. Extended rest cycles, rotation limits, companion animals at bases, all attempts to humanize troops whose stress originates from sound rather than battle. It's unprecedented, treating audio frequencies as warfare. Engineers even experiment with counter-noise machines emitting calibrated hums to mask drone signatures. The defense becomes acoustic illusion, warfare turned into sound design. Through it all runs the same lesson older ages learned under thunder and flame. Fear remains the cheapest weapon ever invented. A bottle's fire ruled tanks, a wire under asphalt ruled convoys, and now a whisper of rotors rules skies. No empire can budget immunity to anticipation. As conflicts continue, psychologists warn of a generational echo. Children growing up under constant aerial presence may normalize surveillance, equating open sky with risk. Entire cultures might inherit reflexes of avoidance, scheduling lives by silence, mistrusting daylight. The battlefield thus radiates far beyond trenches. It seeps into memory, architecture, and language. And perhaps that's the clearest signal that history loops. The technologies differ, but the emotion stays identical. The awareness that danger can descend without reason or pattern. In medieval Europe, it was divine will. In industrial wars, artillery fate. Today, algorithmic probability. For those underneath, semantics don't matter. A hum overhead means keep still. So when soldiers whisper prayers under camouflage nets, they're joined in spirit by every fighter who once flinched at thunder or flame. The medium changes, the fear doesn't. From above or below, expense or improvisation, war always finds its cheapest instrument in the human mind. Section 9. The Endless Race of Adaptation. Every era ends believing it's found the formula for invincibility, and every era begins again proving it hasn't. You can trace that rhythm across centuries, the wheel turning faster but never escaping its orbit. From wagons circling on Bohemian plains to drones spiraling over trench networks, the engine of warfare hasn't been innovation itself, but reaction. Every invention births its own demise because every defense teaches someone how to bypass it cheaper. Picture the sequence: a knight adds another layer of steel, a peasant answers with lead. A nation invents the tank, a soldier answers with fire in a bottle. Superpowers field jet fighters, insurgents throw up radar confusing nets. Then comes the drone, looping back to simplicity, reminding everyone that complexity ages in dog years. The pattern doesn't just repeat, it accelerates. What once took generations to overturn now collapses within months of deployment. This isn't coincidence, it's the structure of competition itself. Technology amplifies every strength and every blindness at once. Wealth ensures production but dulls improvisation. Scarcity, by contrast, becomes an incubator. The less one side owns, the faster it learns. The history of warfare, stripped of glamour, is simply the history of unequal resourcefulness. Think about the Hussites again. Their brilliance wasn't new weaponry but refusal to stay predictable. They updated formation faster than papal decrees could respond. Or the Finns heating snowdrifts with gasoline bottles before Soviet manuals even registered change. The Viet Cong stringing launchers from tree branches. The roadside bomb makers in Iraq treating every failed detonation as feedback. Each group different in cause, united in tempo, experimentation unrestrained by hierarchy. Meanwhile, their opponents shared another rhythm: procurement cycles, oversight committees, caution disguised as professionalism. Bureaucracies design certainty, war punishes certainty. Every delay between observation and adjustment opens new ground for those less restricted. It's the oldest paradox in strategy: you can't innovate efficiently inside a structure built for accountability. Economists describe it through diminishing returns. The first coin spent on defense buys safety, the 100th buys paperwork. Past a threshold, cost rises faster than protection. That's why empires often look strongest just before decline. They're over-optimized for stability. Rome fell not for lack of metal, but for lack of mental flexibility. Modern militaries risk the same fate: their logistics chains longer than their curiosity. Across laboratories today, engineers work on autonomous swarms and laser domes, claiming each system as endgame. Yet somewhere in a workshop, a student rewires a quadcopter, and the future tilts fractionally away from certainty again. Adaptation isn't a sprint, it's evolution. The rich species specialize until the environment changes. The small survive by mutation. Battlefields follow biology more than engineering. Sometimes the adaptation isn't even technological, it's psychological. During the drone wars, soldiers learned to mimic machine unpredictability, moving irregularly, staying half-visible, turning silence into tactic. Humans become counter-algorithms, confusing sensors through spontaneity. The irony is complete: soldiers beat automation by acting less automatic. This constant oscillation breeds exhaustion. Each new defense must justify its budget by promising finality, though everyone involved knows finality doesn't exist. Generals talk about left-of-boom strategies, stopping attacks before inception, but even prevention generates counter-prevention. When prevention fails, the terminology resets and funding renews. The same race renamed endlessly. Yet there's beauty in this futility. The fact that equilibrium never settles means creativity never stops. War, unpleasant as its laboratory is, remains proof that human imagination refuses stagnation. The same urge that designs shields also crafts spears. The contest sustains invention even when peace won't. The tragedy is only that the testing ground is human. Look closely though, and you'll see symbiosis rather than opposition. Drones borrowing parts from gaming rigs, counter systems training on open-source footage from enemy strikes. The lines between sides blur into shared evolution. What one invents, the other refines. Rivalries accelerate knowledge the way competition fuels science. The race of adaptation, for all its destruction, doubles as civilization's shadow workshop. But no cycle is infinite without consequence. Each layer of sophistication distances leaders from the people who improvise at ground level. The longer decisions take, the shorter adaptability lasts. That's why revolutions in warfare often begin not in capitals but in corners: bohemian farms, Finnish forests, mountain caves, suburban garages. Vision thrives where authority doesn't notice. Some historians call this the democratization of destruction, others call it entropy. Either way, it's irreversible. As information spreads, expertise becomes currency anyone can mint. Every smartphone owner carries potential to learn, to hack, to modify. Centralized power with its patents and permissions can't outpace collective curiosity. The next asymmetric leap won't require armies, only access. Still, even the underdog isn't immune to stagnation. Once improvisation becomes doctrine, it hardens too. Success tempts repetition, and repetition dulls insight. The guerrilla who wins becomes the guard of the next era. Innovation has no permanent owner. It passes through hands like contraband, loyal only to necessity. The psychological toll is universal. Defenders feel humiliation, attackers feel impermanence. Nobody truly wins because the horizon keeps moving. Soldiers in trenches dream of security that won't arrive. Engineers chase reliability that can't exist. The battlefield mirrors life. Every solution sets its own expiry date. We fix problems to create new ones, mistaking motion for progress. That realization doesn't invite cynicism, it invites humility. Warfare's unpredictability isn't a failure of planning, it's a reminder of complexity beyond control. The further technology advances, the smaller the margin between genius and collapse. A system designed to prevent shock eventually manufactures it, because equilibrium, once reached, seeks disturbance like gravity seeks fall. Modern analysts often ask whether cost asymmetry can ever stabilize, whether defense might finally become cheaper than attack. History answers softly: not for long. Efficiency is always temporary. The cheaper tool adapts, the expensive one defends its sunk cost. Strategy becomes archaeology, digging through layers of outdated confidence. Every artifact whispers the same epitaph: we thought we were ready. Even now, as autonomous algorithms study battle data in real time, the next countermeasure gestates unknowingly. Maybe it's a code exploit hiding in open forums, a child science project that someday rewrites targeting logic. Innovation never sleeps under the same roof twice. Perhaps the only constant worth trusting is this: adaptability costs nothing except pride. When nations forget that, they pay doubly, once in treasure, once in surprise. The arc of history doesn't bend toward progress, it loops through humility. In an age obsessed with precision, the future may favor improvisation again. Simpler systems recover faster, learn quicker, die cheaper. The most advanced armies will still stand vulnerable to mistakes made in garages, because creativity obeys no hierarchy. That ungovernable energy is both danger and salvation. It ensures humanity remains unpredictable even when its weapons aren't. So the race continues, not out of malice or madness but physics of survival. Heat meets cold, armor meets fire, drone meets silence. No invention exists alone, each competes for momentary dominance before surrendering to the next improvisation. The wheel spins, gathering speed but staying grounded in the same mud that birthed wagons centuries ago. And that's why the story never ends with victory parades or peace treaties. It ends where it began, in a workshop, in a field, in a mind refusing submission. The endless race of adaptation is the truest constant of war, the paradox that keeps chaos and creativity codependent. The drone buzzing over the horizon isn't the final threat, it's just the latest question. And somewhere, as always, someone with fewer resources is already sketching the answer. Conclusion: the cost of overconfidence. The battlefield quiets, but the pattern doesn't. The drone that slipped through a $40 million shield is already history's next metaphor, another monument to overconfidence dismantled in real time. For every empire that built higher walls, there was always someone outside calculating how to step over them cheaply. And every time, arrogance went bankrupt faster than imagination. Look back across everything we've traced. Wagons welded into armor, bottles turned to fire, rockets lifted on shoulders, wires buried beneath asphalt, drones humming over soldiers who once thought skies belonged to them. None began with funding, they began with frustration. They were built by people who couldn't afford mistakes, so they learned faster. Their victories weren't miracles, they were budget corrections to the myth that money guarantees control. That myth thrives where comfort dulls curiosity. Bureaucracies stretch design cycles into decades while their enemies innovate overnight. Wealth rewards procedure, necessity rewards instinct. Every age repeats the same vow that its latest weapon will finally end its vulnerabilities. And every age meets the same response from some obscure garage or workshop: perfection costs too much. The paradox humiliates technology itself. Machines don't fail because physics betrays them. They fail because humans forget what equations can't account for: adaptation, surprise, madness under pressure. The end of every superweapon begins with the return of imagination. Modern battlefields prove the same curse in sharper detail. A 40 million array loaded with sensors and algorithms can miss what a $600 hobby drone delivers with spare parts and patience. Each countermeasure costs a fortune to build and pennies to defeat. Every failed intercept becomes an accounting error written in flame. That isn't malfunction, it's economics detonating in public. There's a strange irony in progress. The richer the technology, the poorer its intuition. Systems designed to simplify war end up complicating survival. The wealthier a nation grows, the slower it learns. Efficiency erases improvisation, certainty trades agility for ritual. What planners call sophistication, history calls inertia. Every modern doctrine still carries ancient mistakes under new names: shock and awe, network-centric dominance, full-spectrum superiority. The slogans polish old illusions, but the surprise remains identical. The underdog never gets the memo. The true enemy isn't across the field, it's the optimism inside the command center. Overconfidence remains the most expensive stealth weapon ever made. So when a $600 drone outwits a $40 million fortress, it isn't anomaly, it's prophecy. That little frame of carbon fiber and code is the grandchild of every wagon, every bottle, every rocket that rewrote military logic through simplicity. Each flight is a reminder that innovation always sides with necessity, not authority. If history insists on looping, maybe the only progress worth chasing is humility. War punishes certainty because certainty forgets friction. The next generation of lasers, radars, or AI weapons will still inherit the same equation: the cheap will adapt faster than the rich can budget. The wheel of adaptation never stops spinning, it just changes material. That might sound like despair, but it's balance disguised as irony. Because as long as creativity survives, beneath rubble, behind screens, in minds the world ignores, the scale can never stay tilted for long. Power loses equilibrium the moment it stops learning. The real cost of overconfidence isn't measured in money, it's measured in blindness. The hum overhead isn't just a threat, it's an education. It reminds every army, every engineer, every strategist what their predecessors forgot: ingenuity doesn't check the price tag before it flies. The war will evolve, the tools will shift, but unpredictability will always remain the only law no weapon can repeal. Power that forgets humility doesn't stay powerful long. It becomes the next target waiting for someone resourceful enough to destroy it cheaply. That's the rhythm history refuses to break. Every fortress inspires its ladder. Every shield manufactures a sharper spear. Progress is just opposition with better branding. And in that endless rivalry lies the one consolation of war's chaos. It keeps us inventive, whether we can afford to or not. The 40 million weapon that couldn't stop a $600 drone wasn't a mistake. It was a reminder, the oldest, loudest lesson in warfare, that the side with less money but more imagination will always make the world's most expensive failure look inevitable.